Good morning. You all right?
My name is Abdullah. I'm 13 years old. I'm stuck here in Gaza. Have you ever wondered what you'd do if your world was destroyed? Could you live in a tent? Raise your baby? Would you help people? Would you try and have some fun? Most important, could you stay alive? After all this, you could say we're experts. So let me tell you our story. Who knows? One day you might need it.
That was a clip from the BBC documentary Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. And as you saw there, it's fronted by Abdallah Al-Yazouri, a now 14-year-old Palestinian boy from Gaza. It also features 3 other young people detailing the ways they're surviving Israel's genocidal assault on the enclave. There's Renad, a 10-year-old who kept herself occupied after Gaza's schools were closed by starting a TikTok cookery channel with her sister, showing her followers how she prepares meals on a gas-fueled camping stove while bombs fall nearby. 11-year-old Zakaria was separated from his parents, living at Al-Aqsa Hospital at the time Gaza's only functioning hospital. He worked as a fixer and volunteer for ambulance crews, medics and journalists. It's a role that meant he was exposed to an immense amount of bloodshed, with one paramedic saying he thought it was unlikely Zakaria would ever be able to fit in with children his own age as a result. Then there's Rana, a young mother who found herself pregnant in a war zone after leaving her abusive husband. She wants to live alone with her child, but has to survive displacement and Israel's raids on her neighborhood first. The documentary doesn't only focus on children who are somehow managing to survive the war unharmed. This is one of its more harrowing scenes, and I should warn you that some may find it difficult viewing.
يومين استهداف كانت مدرسة هو طب يعني ايده تقريبا مبتورة 90%. العمليات واحد يقدر يسويها. علي أنا نفسي تحترق. والله. My only consolation from all of this is that he perks up afterwards and becomes a bright little boy again.
For those listening on the podcast, that was a scene of a surgeon trying to save the arm of a 10-year-old Palestinian boy hit by a bomb targeting a school. In one scene we can't show on YouTube, the surgeon holds up the child's amputated arm. The documentary is absolutely unflinching in showing the scenes of suffering inside Gaza. But it's also deeply humanizing, showing scenes of hopeful and joyful children like Zakaria enjoying a day at the beach, a break from his grim duties at the hospital. Or Rania watching Iranian missiles falling towards Israel. She describes the scene as unsettling, but says she's grateful that for once the bombs aren't falling on them. Now, that humanizing portrayal of Gaza's children, as well as the sometimes shocking starkness of the documentary's images of destruction, is extremely affecting. And perhaps that's why a group of people are now attacking the BBC and trying to have the documentary taken down. It began with a report from an online researcher alleging that the documentary's narrator, young Abdullah, is the son of Gaza's Deputy Minister of Agriculture, Ayman Al-Yazouri. If that's true, then Abdullah is the son of someone who is a senior member of Hamas's political wing. Now, you might wonder, so what? The political wing of Hamas, which is separate from the armed wing known as the Qassam Brigades, is the civil authority in the enclave, and we rely on it for an immense amount of information. Everything from the Palestinian death toll in Gaza to reports of water and food shortages, hospital updates, and data on all aspects of civilian infrastructure during the assault on the enclave. And why do we rely on it? because Israel won't allow any independent observers and journalists into the region. If we didn't have the Hamas civilian infrastructure in Gaza, we'd only ever hear Israel's side of the story. Now, that connection between 14-year-old Abdullah and Gaza's civic administration was enough to prompt a group of 45 Jewish media figures to pen an open letter criticizing the BBC for airing it. This is from The Independent. In their letter to the BBC, the group asked, was it known to the BBC that the narrator and principal contributor of the documentary, Abdullah al-Yazuri, is the son of a senior leader of the proscribed terrorist group Hamas? If the BBC was aware that Abdullah al-Yazuri was the son of a terrorist leader, why was this not disclosed to the audience during the programme? If the BBC was not aware that Abdullah al-Yazuri was the son of a terrorist leader, what diligence checks were undertaken and why did they fail? Now, you'll notice that they're calling Abdullah's father a senior leader of the proscribed terrorist group Hamas there. That's because the political wing of Hamas is proscribed by the British government. But obviously, the effect of that is to conflate that organisation, which every journalist in the world reporting on this war relies on for information, with the Qassam brigades. Also chipping in, unsurprisingly, was Israel's ambassador to the UK, who posted this on X. Following the release of the BBC Two documentary in Gaza, I have sent an official letter to the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie. I asked for clarification on the BBC's choice of cameraman, as well as the main protagonist of the documentary, given the BBC's supposed commitment to impartiality. I await his response. Such a shock to see an Israeli political figure trying to stem the flow of information from inside Gaza. And she mentions the cameramen there. What were their crimes? Well, firstly, they are Palestinians in Gaza, and one of them is also alleged to have posted online praising the October 7th attack on Israel with an emoji. In the original broadcast, the BBC didn't alert viewers to Abdullah's father's job. The BBC have now changed this in response to complaints. This graphic clarifying that connection now appears at the very beginning of the programme. It also stresses that the BBC's production team had full editorial control over the filming of the documentary. And it's worth mentioning that the BBC has not taken such swift action when multiple reports have come out showing that when Palestinians are killed by Israelis, they don't name who killed them. There's a very distinct approach to how the murder of Palestinians by Israelis is reported on as, passive versus when Israelis are murdered by Palestinians, where it's described in very active terms and they name the perpetrator. The BBC were not as quick to rectify that. But now, Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy has been dragged into this row too. She's promised to discuss the programme with the BBC's Director General. She was asked about the row by LBC's Nick Ferrari.
This is a conversation I'll definitely be having with the BBC.
So you haven't raised it yet with the Director General, the Chairman, this documentary?
Not this specific documentary. I watched it last night. It's something that I will be discussing with them, particularly around the way in which they sourced the people who were featured in the programme. These things are difficult, and I do want to acknowledge that for the BBC, they take more care than most broadcasters in terms of the way that they try to portray these things. They've been attacked for being too pro-Gaza, they've been attacked for being anti-Gaza, but it is absolutely essential that we get this right.
Stephen, do you find those critiques of the documentary convincing?
Not at all, not even in the slightest. If you watch that documentary, Abdullah, who narrates it, doesn't really provide much in the way of information about what's going on in Gaza. He just sort of goes around and introduces characters and talks a bit about what's happened to him. But actually what speaks for itself are the images that constitute the documentary as a whole, as well as the narratives of the other children involved. Especially, I have to say, the story of Zachariah, the little boy who is helping out the ambulances and who, you can just see sort of very casually washing blood off of stretchers, that is itself a striking image without any narration by Abdullah, the son of a Hamas civil government official. So, I think it's very obvious what's going on here. It's just these people are, the group have written this letter, as well as the Israeli ambassador. They're just looking for any way to discredit what is in fact actually an amazing documentary, where the BBC has managed to get amazing access, which would otherwise be completely impossible, to the inside of Gaza during a war, because they've employed Gazan cameramen and because they found a young boy who is willing and able to make this documentary. And was Abdullah encouraged to do it? I'm sure he was. It's in everyone's interest in Gaza to get the story of what is happening there out. Now, the reason that this has turned into a row, and this just brings me on to a different topic, is the BBC's obsession with impartiality. So the BBC is constantly hamstrung by its own commitment to this notion of impartiality. And there's never really a lot of question about why should it care about impartiality? I mean, it's almost like the thought is something like, oh, well, if you get enough of both sides, you'll eventually kind of arrive at reality. But, guess what? Reality is pretty partial. Reality is often very different from what one side is saying versus what another side is saying. And often it's the case that, as you said in an earlier piece, Dahlia, that the power that you have means that it's so much easier to sort of convey the version of reality to an audience that you want to convey, and so much harder for another side to do it. So, yeah, I think the idea of impartiality constantly hamstrings the BBC, and it becomes a sort of distraction where this documentary can actually now start to look like it's being discredited simply because someone is making an accusation. Not that it's saying anything false. No one would dare to say, oh, well, what you're seeing there is not what's happening in Gaza. When that surgeon holds up the amputated arm of a 10-year-old boy, that didn't really happen. That's not what anyone is saying, because they can't say that, because they know that exactly that did happen. What they're saying instead is that the documentary should be brought down. That audiences should be deprived of the chance to see it because the BBC has failed to be impartial. It's failed to, as it were, reflect both sides of what's going on, because in not sort of banning somebody with a connection to the Hamas civilian infrastructure in Gaza from appearing in a major role in the documentary, it's violated impartiality because it hasn't, for example, had an Israeli sort of saying, their side of the story. So yeah, I think it's really the BBC's obsessive commitment to impartiality, which actually I think makes the news often misleading, which has hamstrung it in this case, which has made it the case that people are able to attack it over what is in fact an excellent truth-telling documentary about the situation inside Gaza at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the point is that the thresholds for innocence, the threshold for reliability, the threshold to be seen as neutral for Palestinians is radically different to that of Israelis. Palestinians are not seen as reliable narrators of their own lives. They're not seen as reliable narrators of the political situation, even though they are living it. And if you live in a place where the government, where are you saying that the only way that a Palestinian is allowed to is allowed to represent themselves or is allowed to represent what they're going through? The only way that they can do that is if they have absolutely no relationship to the entity that is governing them. I mean, that's not a standard that we would hold anyone by. It's again that kind of that threshold that Palestinians have to meet to be taken seriously, and even then, they're not taken seriously as narrators of their own conditions.